Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast.
A platform we use to explore varying perspectives and opinion through candid conversation.
We chat about philosophy, business, and all things life. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go. Alrighty, Les, your turn for a topic today.
Yep. Today's topic is going to be, I think it's going to be quite broad. There's going to be quite a depth in it. It's surrounding the notion of knowing or to know, of something that I've been, pondering for quite a long time. And I guess the reason why I want to talk about it is there's like this, a notion in the world generally, or this yearning or wanting to know everything, down to like a very defined and granular level. There's like a very heavy attachment to it, I feel. And I myself, I've been sort of on the opposite end of that spectrum, I guess. And it's something that I haven't really been drawn to a lot. Wisdom is very different to knowledge in my mind, and what is important to me about that aspect of, quote unquote, knowing is how it feels, that visceral side of things. It's going to be, like I said, there's going to be much that we can touch on with this topic, but that's what I want to talk about today.
Cool. You just mentioned the difference between wisdom and knowledge. What do you feel is the difference between wisdom and knowledge?
What do I feel it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think knowledge has like a intellectual connotation to it. Like it's whatever we read, it's been, defined, it's been, refined and distilled by one or a number of people or a group of people. And it's used for a certain means, right? Mm-hmm. To teach, to disseminate learning and things like that. But wisdom is, to me, much deeper than that. It's something that is already known, but mm-hmm. it's not necessarily something that can be articulated through words. But I think the process of expression in an authentic sense is our best attempts to do so. Mm-hmm. I feel like wisdom has this connection with remembrance, and it has this connection with some sort of innate knowing, that we're each born with.
Okay.
So that's, I guess, loosely the difference I feel there is between knowledge and wisdom.
Okay. Yeah, because when I think about it, I think of knowledge more along the lines of, how would I say, like proven facts. Mm. You know what I mean? And like you said, knowledge is generally taught, whereas I feel wisdom has this element of it that it's passed. It's passed along, it's passed down, it's passed to other people. Mm. And generally when I think about it being based on learned experience, right? So it's like you hear the wisdom of elders and you think about it in terms of they've had certain experiences which they've learned a lesson from.
Yeah.
And then they decide to pass that on either through story or by telling you an anecdote or just a simple lesson. And that's wisdom. I think for me, that's the distinction when I think about it. It's like learned experience that's being passed along, whereas knowledge, I guess, tends to a lot of the times deal in fact or what people think is fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good way of putting it. I mean, that word you use is past, and like if you think about the process of something being passed along, even in the context of birth, that in itself, there are factors from our parents that are passed through to us,
Yep.
And that in itself has an inheritance of knowledge and wisdom with it, mm-hmm. that comes with that. That's a nice way of putting it. And like I said, I think it's one of those things that are really difficult to articulate in terms of describing what wisdom truly is. And I think that is partly the point.
Yeah.
You know, it's like subjective. It's sort of wisdom is owned by an individual, you know,
Yeah.
and it can be passed down, but it's not a direct passing down of what it is. It is an interpretation for another to then interpret in their own unique way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now that you're talking about it, I guess I would see wisdom as more of an individualized concept
Yeah.
or individualized form of knowledge, really. Whereas knowledge is kind of this collective information that people agree on generally.
Yeah.
Right? They say like knowledge is power, but like what is that knowledge? It's generally something that people see as a fact that is then shared or learned by people. Whereas wisdom tends to be more personal,
Yeah.
and collective wisdom isn't. I don't feel like that's as prevalent a notion as collective knowledge.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think let's keep that in mind. I think let's talk about both sides of the fence here, you know, and let's talk about what's, you know, generally out there today. You know, what are your thoughts on, you know, collective knowledge generally when we're talking about, you know, the context of the modern world?
In the context of the modern world, I feel like collective knowledge isn't actually that collective. And by that, I mean, I feel that certain people or groups are really good at putting out their information, right? And then people tend to take it on as their own. But it's not really collective. It's being fed, right? So there's this information that's being fed to us, and people take on. I feel like people take a side, right? They'll come across a piece of information, and then they'll attach their own beliefs or oppose that information for whatever reason, right? Whatever their context is, their experiences are, their beliefs are, they apply it to that, and then they hold that as knowledge.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people really stop to think about the fact that we're all being fed information and then just interpreting it and then internalizing and holding on to the parts that we want to.
Yeah.
I think there's very, very little just objective information out there in the modern world.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and I guess that the groups you're talking about, and if we, you know, just think about the world as it is today, you're talking about things like media and like various, you know, religious groups and things like that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I mean, if we hone in on those as examples, like it would be naive to think that all the information coming from public media is 100% objective and accurate. Obviously, we know that they curate the information based on certain, I guess, parameters and certain underlying influencing factors for themselves, you know, like, to generate larger audiences and things like that, and you know, to appease the higher ups and various sponsorship partnerships and things like that. That's generally, there's like an underlying motive behind what is put out through media. And even religion, right? Religion is one of those things, and it's like one of those, you know, touchy subjects that we can talk about to some degree. Like, I'm personally not a very religious person in any sense of the word that is generally known, but I study various religions. You know, I wouldn't call myself a practitioner or a believer of one or the other, but I do lean more towards some than others. But like what I feel religion is, there are underlying principles that are attempted to be conveyed through a very, I guess, nuanced mean. You know, it's adapted by the environment and the culture at the time, and then appropriated out to, you know, spread this sort of message and learning. But if you have a look at, you know, various religions or the major ones, they usually have very similar themes, values, and principles, right? They just got, different clothes on and different characters in the
Generally,
story,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So that sort of tells you like it's not so much like the way you're talking about it in terms of like not having like a collective message. I feel that religion, it does underlying, like, beneath the surface, it really does. But it's just the way that it's, preached.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I want to touch on is you mentioned the word motive, right? And when you look at media or you look at religious groups, however they may be organized, the information that is shared is chosen, right? So the information, it's not all the information. No one puts out every piece of information regarding something. It's not what's done, right? Someone somewhere is choosing the information to be shared, right?
Yeah.
And in that way, it's like that's why it's being fed, right? Someone chooses it and they put that out, and they choose which part. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And generally, people do that because they have an agenda, right? When we talk about having an agenda these days, there's a negative connotation on that, right? It's assumed that if someone has an agenda, it's to make other people do what that person wants them to do. But that's not always the case, right? An agenda is just a set of motives
Yeah.
that someone has. And that's what's happening when people share information, right? They choose certain information to share with people to serve their agenda. They've got a reason for sharing that information.
Yeah.
And think that's what's really important to note and to acknowledge is that you need to be thinking about what the agenda is when someone is sharing information with you, when anyone's sharing information, whether it be a media outlet or a religious group, whether it's a priest or a preacher or a news presenter or even, your friend that runs a group on Facebook.
I think a really good example is social media, right? Like you can neatly categorize certain people in certain contexts in social media, like, a motivational speaker, a fitness industry guy, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, beneath all that, there is also like certain motives. And like if you think about people who run, businesses through social media, their posts are going to have, motivational factor of trying to, create sales for their product or service, right? That's just what it is, plain and simple. It's a marketing tool and vehicle for them. And so that's I guess what you're referring to in terms of understanding what the motivational factors are behind what messages are outlaid into the world.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if many people think about it, but everybody has a way they want the world to be, right? And it's so that they can experience the world in a certain way. And when people share information or knowledge, the agenda underlying, when you break it down, is generally they want the world to be how they want the world to be. So that's the information they're going to share with you to try and bring your view around to theirs.
That's right.
Right? And that's what, like straight up, like I would say I'm religious, right? Like I think I'm more a person of faith, but I do follow a religion, right? And it's very easy to see that in every religion, they have a view of the world, right? And a view of how humanity should be.
Yeah.
And then, they share what they believe is knowledge, or they share beliefs that they want other people to subscribe to. And it's great. Like when you take it to the extreme, that's what religious wars are fought on, right? Or what they say they're fought on. There's an agenda there, and it's to get people to conform or to come around and act in the way that they want people to act. And that's what I think of when I think of an agenda, right? And why information and certain information is shared. Why else would you put out any information?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point? Is to get someone else to take that information in and then do something with it.
Yeah.
And the information you put out is generally going to be so you can get that other party, that other side, whoever's taking that knowledge in, to do what you want them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think that it's a good picture to paint, but also it's not something that is, I guess, solely alone in the religious realm.
No, not at all.
If you pull yourself back, that is generally speaking what society and civilization has been about.
Yeah, I think religion is just an easy example for us to use.
Totally. And I think that's, if we have a look at what, knowledge in that context is, that in itself, like we've been saying, is it's a vehicle for order and control, right?
Yep.
It's a interpretation or a distillation of, what we think the world or civilization or humanity should be like, in a general sense, in a general broad sense. And that's where this term knowledge is power sort of comes in, in my opinion. Because if you think about it in that context, we have a construct that is, created for everyone, for the majority of society or humanity to sort of conform to. And then if you are, I guess, knowledgeable in this world, then, naturally that's how you quote unquote succeed in this world, because these are the rules. Know the rules, know the game, then you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
Right? That gives you the power to play in the game.
Yeah, and when you're playing a game, no matter what that game is, right? Whether it's business or a conversation that you're trying to convince someone else to do something else, it's a negotiation, right? And I've read a book which is a really good book for anyone that wants to learn about negotiation. It's called You Can Negotiate Anything by Herb Cohen. And he talks about there's 3 elements to every negotiation. And those 3 elements are time, information, and power, right? So the information is generally the knowledge. Yep. And he who has more information is on the better side of the negotiation or has a better platform from which to negotiate.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really important, that part. And when people think they have more information, you tend to feel like you're in a more of a powerful position generally as well, right? So you're playing into this arena, or when you're in the arena, you feel like you're in a better position to negotiate what you want, which is whatever your agenda is.
Totally. Yeah. So I guess it's important to know, we point out that, knowledge in that particular context or information, as you put it, it is a very useful, tool and resource, and I guess to have in that context, if that arena is something that you feel you want to be within, and if you want to succeed in.
Yeah, and another thing, and I think we always make the point about this in the podcast, was really important, is just because certain concepts and terms are used and there's a negative connotation on it, doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you think about negotiation, same thing. A lot of times, I know for a fact when people hear the word negotiation, they think, how am I going to get fucked?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how can one side win over the other? And that's not what negotiation is in its essence. Negotiation in its essence is 2 parties or multiple parties trying to come to a collective solution for something, right? And a lot of times, yes, one side does come out quote unquote better. But negotiation inherently is not bad, right? Agendas inherently are not bad. Motives inherently are not bad. They're just what people want. And people can want really good things. People can want really noble things. People can want really helpful things and positive outcomes to come out of agendas, motives, and negotiations. And I think it's important for people, especially like when we discuss these things, to keep that in mind, that the way you approach whatever it is that you're looking at is to not have a set preconception about what that thing is, and to think it's bad more than anything, right? Because then you tend to tie a lot of these other emotions to it, and you can't see those things for what they are and for what they could be.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to put it. I mean, it can be a bit of a a trap for people just because those sorts of connotations are attached, especially within the realm of knowledge, but it's not necessarily necessary,
Yeah.
I guess. And it's not necessarily something that needs to be, like you said. Like just because within this realm collectively, these are the notions that are attached to certain words or phrases, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to uphold that as well, or it doesn't have to be projected in that way either, or felt the same way. And I think it sort of leads into this nice sort of discussion around what knowledge does and what it creates. And like you touched on it a little bit in terms of, I guess, this notion of right and wrong. It's like dualistic, notions of once we've solidified something in the realm of definition and knowledge, then everything that falls outside of that is inherently incorrect. And that for me is one of the things, like the key drivers of conflict of any kind, right?
Yeah.
Especially when people latch onto these ideals with like this dogmatic fervor. They're just there to hold on to these ideas, life and death. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, in terms of this notion of how knowledge creates like this black and white divide.
Yep. So for me, when I think about that, like knowledge is another one of those things that just is. Like you can put something out there. It's what's done with the knowledge that matters.
Yeah.
And in that regard, though, you can put information out or share knowledge in a certain way that tries to get the other side to feel a certain way, right? Or act a certain way. But we all have the choice of what we do with the knowledge that we're shared. Sorry, the knowledge that we are given or the knowledge that we come across. And that's why I don't personally feel like you can be convinced or made to do something just based on information or knowledge alone.
Totally.
And, it's one of those things we've been talking a lot recently about critical thinking and applying that. And I think it comes into play, especially when we look at knowledge and information, because like I said, information just is like it's put out there. We have to interpret it, then we have to apply it in some fashion or form.
And I think that's the key point there, like the interpretation and application, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's why I don't really agree when people say certain things shouldn't be shared, because I understand that people are impressionable, that people can be influenced. I'm not saying that's not the case at all. It's a reality. But it also it takes away people's power to be able to discern.
Totally. Absolutely does. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it that way, and when you talk about discernment with knowledge, right, I think that what it does for people is, like you said, it just makes people's job easier in a sense, in terms of like understanding what something truly is, right? Like it sort of solidifies something in a way that isn't necessarily the case. Just because something is defined doesn't mean that it isn't something else. Like the example that I like to give all the time is like a tree doesn't stop being a tree if you stop calling it a tree. It's still a tree. You can call it whatever the fuck you want. It's still going to be what it is, right? Like you could sit there and try and, define every single nano detail of what a tree is and what it does, but it still wouldn't capture every single essence of what a tree is, right? Mm-hmm. So what purpose does it truly serve to call it as such, And like there's that whole process of when does a tree become a tree from a sprout? What is the difference? And all that sort of thing. Is there like a certain height or measurement? Is there a certain like width that it needs to get into? That sort of thing. It's very, to me, that the arguments surrounding that sort of thing, and when we're attaching to ideas and definitions, it's so subjective, and to me, it's like it's a waste of time. It really is. It's just like projections of interpretation, which really, like, comes down to opinion, and opinion is owned by individuals, and that's it. And they can be whatever the fuck they want to be, and they can be as wild as they want to be, and no one is to say whether they're right or wrong.
Yeah.
Because they're owned by the person who expressed them.
Yep.
And I guess the other thing about when talking about definitions and things like that, I mean, coming back to our conversation, or bringing up the notion of motives, I think about what language and knowledge and that kind of thing is created for. What is the purpose of those, vehicles? And they are vehicles to me.
Yeah.
Like, it's for communication.
Yes.
And for dissemination of information, right?
Yeah.
That we know at a certain point in time. That's what it's for.
And so that people can understand what's being shared.
Yeah, and that's what it's for, right? It's not to say that this is what it is, full stop, end of story. Let's go on to the next one and create more knowledge about something else that we haven't defined or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't like encapsulate something and then stop the conversation about what it could be outside of what we think it is. You know what I mean?
Correct.
That goes back to that tree example that I
Yeah,
gave.
it does. And I think there's that phrase, right? It is what it is. And you know how much I sarcastically love that saying, right? Because it is what it is until it isn't. Right? And I think in the context of knowledge and information and knowing, a lot of people look at things as like, oh, it is what it is. But it is what it is until it isn't. And nothing just is. There's always something that can be done, a different interpretation. You know what I mean? And that's why I think the subjective nature of information and knowledge is so important to highlight. There are facts out there, but they're really few and far between.
Totally. And even so, man, like we've talked about this before as well, like facts are captured at a point in time until, later on we'd go on and disprove them.
100%. See, it is what it is until it isn't. And, I've also heard recently discussions around there's the truth and then there's your truth.
Yep.
And they're not the same.
Yeah, definitely. They can be, but they don't have to be.
No, they don't have to be.
Yeah.
Right? And we choose what the truth is.
Yeah.
We see the truth as this, concrete, usually benevolent, knowingness or knowledge that we have. But the truth is based on so many factors, right? Individually based on so many factors.
Totally. That's so many factors individually before you even look externally.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about things like a collective truth or a collective knowledge, it's just collective held by a certain group.
That's right.
Right? And that's why we have so much divide in society.
Yeah.
Is because people take information in or knowledge in, they internalize it, they have an interpretation, they apply their own beliefs to it, and then they do X, Y, or Z with that. And generally what happens is they find other people that share the same type of beliefs, and those people band together. And then that becomes their collective knowledge or their collective truth. But for another group, it may not be the case at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
And the way that information and knowledge is shared and what is chosen to be shared affects that. Right? And that's why it's so important to think critically and figure out, why is this being shared? what is being shared, what is not being shared, and what's the reason.
That's right.
And then what do I do with all of this?
Yeah. Why are things being shared and why aren't things being shared?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And at the end of the day, you can debate anything for however long you want, but then what do you do with it?
Totally. Yeah. And like that's what it is at the end of the day, I think. Like if we're talking about the collective ideas and the collective notions of what is, quote unquote, right or wrong, and like we don't have to go down into, morals and ethics and things like that. I think that's a whole nother, kettle of fish. Is that the saying, kettle of fish? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, another whole nother topic or subtopics to talk about later on. But like knowledge at the end of the day, I think that if we think about modern world today, it's a dominant view from the Western people, Western world, and that's what our world largely is built on nowadays, right? Mm-hmm. This view from the Western people who have conquered most of the world and thought that this is how humanity should be. There's this very, and I'll come back to why I talked about this at the start, like this attachment to knowing. That is a very Western thing. Mm-hmm. You talk to people, and I'll give an example of meditation because, again, to me, meditation is just something that you know, right? Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily explain it. So that's why the way that I teach it may be a little bit different to many people, but people come down and say, oh, what are the facts? What is it supposed to do? How am I supposed to do this? For how long am I supposed to, hold my breath and all that sort of thing? And like, look, it's really a personal practice, right? It's something that's visceral. It's felt, right? Mm. If you feel it, you'll know you felt it. Like I can describe it a certain way, but you will describe it completely different, perhaps, So how am I to bridge that gap, You simply have to, like you said, experience it, Experience this for yourself. So, but there's this notion that, if I can't explain it in a intellectual form, then it must not be rigorous in terms of the application. It mustn't be true. Mm. If it's so open-ended, then how am I supposed to get what I want to get out of it? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of examples out there that are like that, with this, if we talk about, the health and fitness industry with set diet plans and set, week programs and things like that, rather than a simple shift in lifestyle that, is open-ended and it's exploratory and it lasts your entire life essentially, right? But that's not appealing to someone who wants to simply get results, right? Yeah. So that is important to note, I feel, because this may not be the way that you want to think necessarily, right? This is just a collective Western notion, right? This I guess, drawing toward the need to know, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why it's not to say that it's right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It just is what it is. That's just how Western people think. I think that it's something that has been, I guess, appropriated through the success of this mode of thinking and operation back in even industrial times, that where this sort of simple industrious application, it does work, when you put it into simple measures. But we're talking very mechanical things that are linear, right? And it's obviously not something that we can apply in the same way for our own lives, which are the exact opposite of something that is linear.
Yeah. Yeah. So true, man. And I think there's a lot of areas in life where we feel that we have a lot of knowledge, and then there are some where we don't have that much at all. But even those areas that we don't have much knowledge in, they continue to exist and things continue to happen in those realms. And just because we don't have the knowledge doesn't mean that they're not powerful. Right? Yeah. And like you said, facts are facts until, like, at a certain point in time, until you come to have more knowledge or learn more in whatever way that may be, and then it changes. Yeah. Right? Think about things like, space and the sun. Everybody thought they knew what it was at a certain point in time, until later on you learn more and more, and then you learn what we think it actually is.
Yeah.
Right? And then what we learn things actually are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like at the end of the day, like, again, those sorts of things, if you think about it from a individualistic level, like knowledge of the greater galaxy and the universe, it may not really mean anything to an individual, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess, again, there is motives behind knowing that for, astronomers and whoever, study that sort of thing. There is a reason why they want to know that sort of thing.
Yes.
But there is also things that, the highest level people in those fields acknowledge that they can likely never understand.
Yeah.
Like dark matter is one of those things, right? Mm-hmm. They just know that it's something, but they just cannot quantify it with human intellect.
Yeah.
And mathematics and things like that.
And even things that we think we understand, like we say that we know, but how much do we know? Like the sun. Everybody knows stats about it and what it does and blah, blah, blah. But like, I don't know anyone that's been there to actually know.
Yeah.
No one does.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just, we're taking the best knowledge and information that we have at a point in time, and then that becomes the fact or the truth, right? But unless you've actually experienced something, you can't categorically say that it's the truth.
Totally. And at the same time, with experience, we also need to be, I guess, cognizant of the fact that it is our own subjective experience of something, and that in itself, like, can be painted by so many different things. Like, if you went, for example, if we were to talk about the experiences we've had in visiting a certain coffee shop, you and I may have had, very different mornings leading up to that point. We might have been in very different states of mind to be within that experience and experience that experience, right? Yeah. We may have had different things in our mind, all those sorts of things. It's all going to play into how we actually experience that moment.
Yeah.
So if we then relay our experience to each other, which will be subjective, it's not unlikely that they're going to be different.
Yeah. And I think what's important to draw out from that is your individual experience or knowledge of something does not form the collective truth.
That's right.
Right? Like, you could go to a coffee shop and you went in at 10 o'clock and you got a cappuccino and it was shit, right? And then you might go in, and then you tell me it's crap, right? We chat on the phone at like 10:15, you're like, that coffee's really shit. But then if you go in at 1 o'clock, maybe the barista's different. But you told me that the coffee at coffee shop X is shit. If you go back at 1 o'clock, you, same person, could go back there and have a coffee made by someone else, and it's amazing. Best coffee you ever had, right? So, like, your individual experience at one point in time does not form a collective truth about something.
Totally. I think that's a good example, because like, coffee is something that is such an acquired taste and, very subjective.
Yeah. But even my point of using the different time is like the same person with the same taste, same, experience, like, just based on when you have that experience or come across something or where you experience it can completely change what you perceive as the truth about something, right? Not even like you went there and you hated it and I went there and I liked it. It's like you went there at one time and you hated it, but if you went there at another time, you may have loved it, right? And then that's what you share with people. It's like when you read a review about something online. Maybe someone got something and it didn't work for them the way they wanted it to.
Totally.
Right? But if then someone else goes and buys it, it's revolutionary and it's exactly what they were looking for and it did everything they wanted and more.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not concrete. And who experiences it and when you experience something and how is what makes all the difference.
So important. Even it's important to point out in those, and something nice to keep in mind when we're talking about like reviews. Like, there's so many reviews for anything on the internet these days. Really have to take it with a grain of salt, because again, who are these people? Where are they coming from? What is the situation? When did they experience it? There's so many different things that could impact their experience that is going to be different to yours. So, it's cool. Again, this is like this realm of knowledge, I guess, in informing yourself a little bit more about and just understanding what other people experience about whatever you're buying. But at the same time, it can't be taken as gospel to say this is the truth because this person fucking hated it. Yeah. Everyone must hate it.
100%. And there's, even when you think about things like staying on online reviews, right? When do people generally write reviews? A lot of the time. It's when they've had a shit experience. A lot of the time when people have a good experience, they don't write about it. It's just not what people do. So if you take on all those reviews and you like make a concrete judgment based on it for yourself, you don't have all the information.
Yeah.
There's not a review on there by every single person who's experienced it.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of the times it's someone that, again, coming back to why would someone post that? Right? Yeah. It's because when someone has a shit experience, they feel like they've been wronged and they don't want it to happen. So they're like, I don't want this to happen to anyone else. But you just want to air your grievance, right? And it's the same reason why people that have a good experience may not post about it because, it might just be good, but it's not like, I want everybody to have this great experience. It's just you had the experience and you enjoyed it and that's it. Right?
Yeah.
It's like taking, what's the point? And then what are you going to do with it?
It's like being informed by skewed data, pretty much.
Totally. Right? That's what it is. Yeah, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah. Let's bring the conversation to the other end of the spectrum then. So we talked about, collective knowledge a little bit, but and then you brought up this notion of collective wisdom. Like, I'd love to get your thoughts on that because, for me, I have, I guess, a very different understanding of it, perhaps, or a different interpretation of it. But I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So, as I said, wisdom for me is it's a type of knowledge based on learned experience, right? So it's generally someone has had an experience, they've taken something from that, a lesson or formed a belief, and it's shared. And then it's up to you what you do with that, right? Wisdom also has this, I guess, when you think about wisdom, it's generally in a positive light as well, right? So talked about how things can generally be seen as negative, but there's also some things that are just seen as positive. Wisdom's one of those things. You think that wisdom is this great, benevolent knowledge and knowing that's going to help you. But there can be wisdom out there that's pretty poor, right? Because someone's had an experience and they've applied their beliefs to it, and now they're sharing that with someone. And it may be right based on their experience, it was crap. Or based on their experience, they had a poor experience, and now they're telling you to do something with that, which might not actually turn out well.
Yeah.
Right? So like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like if someone has a bad experience in their life and they take that to be how it is in all cases, right? That one instance. That's their experience. and then they go, because of this, you should never do that, right? That wisdom that they've shared with you, you might take that on, and then you never do what they told you not to do.
Yeah.
Where in reality, if you actually did the opposite and you did that thing, it might turn out great for you.
Yeah.
So, the fact that it's knowledge or information really that's being shared with you based on someone's experience is key to understand. And you need to really stop and assess whether that person is where you want to be.
Yeah. Or whether they, I guess, in the right position to
offer that type
offer
of...
it, and whether you want to be taking that information from that person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. Like for me, one of the things I've learned, and which, a mode that I use, is I never take advice or use the wisdom of someone that's in a position I don't want to be in.
Yeah.
It's like you don't take legal advice from the guy that's in jail.
Yeah.
And you don't take financial advice from a dude that's broke.
Totally. Yeah. So do you believe there is a notion of collective wisdom there? Do you think that thing is something that exists?
No, I don't. I think it's like wisdom is so subjective, as in terms of, again, like when you hear about wisdom or people talk about wisdom, it's generally something that they think is going to help them, something that you can apply to come out in a better position,
Yeah.
or something you can do or something you can use to avoid being in a shit position. So again, that's very subjective, because where you are and what position you're going to be in is based on where you want to be, based on your beliefs and your situation. So I don't think that collective wisdom is really a thing. I think that one way that collective wisdom could exist is, there's groups of similar people, or, collective that has had the same type of experience over and over and over again, right? So there's a continuity to it, and there's a shared experience. So it's like a certain people in a certain context, they do something or experience something, and they all have the same experience, right? So you take that as collective wisdom. They've experienced something, and that's the way that it has been for them, like across the board.
Yep.
And then that can form collective wisdom, I think.
I'm with you, but let's peel back the layers, right? I'm with you with that regard in terms of like this group of people notion.
Yeah.
But if we take away, the semblance of, any groups or anything else, if we talk about humanity as a group of people, to me, that's where collective wisdom lies, because we go back and talk about what knowledge is trying to do. It's like a attempted, I guess, interpretation and documentation and definition of what humanity is and what they should be and all that sort of thing, right? I think collective wisdom is, that innate connection with something that is greater than ourselves, that, again, we cannot articulate as such, but we feel it. And we all, as humans, innately have that connection. We're born with it, right? And to me, that is what it is. Like there's this, people call it, this connection with God, the divine, whatever you want to call it. It's, to me, it's there, right? I've felt it before. I feel it on a daily basis, right? And it's something, again, that it's because, like, this is why certain religions, different religions exist, is because people have experienced it in different ways, and that's their interpretation of it, right? But, like, if we think about, the era of, pre-language and pre-words and anything like that, right? There was still things that exist back in those days that have the same or similar meanings or interpretations now. Like Carl Jung references like story, and he references myth, and he references symbols, right? like everyone knows, like, you know, the phallic symbol represents something versus a circle, it represents something, and a triangle represents something. All these things, they existed throughout all recorded history, even times that predate, you know, language. So why do these things continue to appear in people's, you know, field of consciousness, you know, if they don't represent something deeper, you know? And to me, like, going back to my interpretation of what I feel wisdom is, it's just something that you feel, right? And then from that, you try your best to represent it in some way, shape, or form in a, you know, physical way. And that's, to me, like, symbols is just like the thing that just creates like this linearity or connection with all of humanity. Like, that, to me, is the substance of what we're trying to get at, what we're trying to figure out as people, as humans. It's a very interesting notion and take on it, I feel. Like, to me, I feel like it's one of those things that it seems very off the cuff and a bit, you know, left of field. And that's fine. I get that, because it's not, it doesn't, and this is like, to me, this is the reason, because like we were talking about before, it doesn't necessarily align with this Western view that is so like straight edged and, you know, linear. It doesn't fit in that at all. It's so fucking like, you know, all over the place that you can't necessarily contain it in like a few words or a few concepts. But this is, to me, like the beauty of it at the same time, you know? There's like this great balance between like emotion and intellect.
Yeah.
You know? And like, now that you like start painting the picture, the Western world has lent heavily toward intellect. Whereas before, when we're talking about all these things and what wisdom is, it's felt, right? You don't necessarily need to think, you know, to know.
Yeah.
It's felt. So that's more emotional. How do we marry those two together?
Yeah.
Or it's not even a marriage, because they're not apart, really, are they?
And you don't necessarily need to marry them as well. I think that's another element of wisdom that's, you know, that you've highlighted, which is really important to think about, is that wisdom is generally felt, or it's shared or formed based on a feeling. Whereas we try to really, whereas knowledge is intellectualized.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I guess there's this old, there's a book by Erich Fromm, who's a psychotherapist from Germany, I think back in the early 20th century. He works quite closely with some Zen Buddhist philosophers, so Daisetsu Suzuki, and they wrote a book together called Zen Buddhism and Psychotherapy, right? So it's this marriage, or this sort of assessment of Eastern and Western worlds. And there's this like nice little story that paints a good picture, where they say, if there was a flower and a Zen Buddhist monk saw it, he'd look at it and examine it, and he'd just feel all the feelings that he was getting from that moment and admire the beauty of the flower, right? And so much could come from that very simple moment of just observing the beauty of something in nature. Whereas a psychotherapist from the West, they would pull the flower out of the ground, they would pull the petals apart, they would, you know, deeply analyze every little bit of it to try and understand what it's all about, you know? Like, there's this inherent sort of view of, you know, even tugging that flower out of the ground, that it's killing something that is alive, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the West tries to do. In trying to understand, they kill it, you know, they take the life from it.
Yeah.
Because they detach themselves from it, really. You're not really understanding what it's there for. It's just something in nature
Yeah.
that makes us feel good. You know?
Yeah.
So it's not to say again that one is right or wrong, but there is a real nice harmony that lies somewhere in between these two worlds.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure. And I guess again, it's like, what are you doing with the wisdom or knowledge? And that's important.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, there's something that we talk about as well, in terms of you can study as hard as you want. You know, you can learn everything in the entire world. Let's say that it's possible for one person to do that. But then you spend your whole life doing that, and then you die. What's the point?
Yeah.
You know, it's like if you meditate for the rest of your life, and you become enlightened, and then you die, then I guess what's the point of that? All that sort of thing. I think that there is a beautiful balance to be struck. I think there is a reason why we've been given this immense power of, you know, being able to intellectualize things, right? It's such a powerful ability, but it is also a great burden at the same time, I feel, because if you think about it, a lot of people who suffer from, you know, mental illness, it's just because of what is going on within their field of consciousness. You know, it becomes so overwhelming and out of control because you just don't know, and maybe you really want to know, or people are telling you you need to know, or all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I don't know, it's an interesting thread to follow, I think.
It is, for sure. And I think it's just really interesting that as humans we have the ability to think and feel.
Yeah, I think that there's something to it.
Yeah.
Right? It has to be, because these are the workings of evolution, right? If we think about whether that is true or not, again, I don't want to get into these arguments with people who are Darwinists and aren't Darwinists and things like that, right?
Yeah.
If we follow the premise that we've been given these abilities through evolution, there is a reason for it, right? You think about the stuff that humans do these days. Do you think that we've evolved to do certain shit that we do today? Like, I don't know, just go into big buildings that go up into the sky and, you know, tap on keys all day, and then go home and make dinner and go to sleep and do it all over again for 30 odd years? I don't know. I don't know. You know, could be, right? I don't know.
I don't know either, man.
But that, I guess it's just that's like the I personally have a view that it's not. Obviously, I've personally moved out of that world because I don't feel like it's what I'm here to do. But that, again, is my personal interpretation of what my life is about.
Yeah.
It's not a collective view as such.
And you know, coming back to what we've been talking about as well, it's you've had certain experiences, you have your own beliefs that have been formed by different experiences and knowledge and information and things you've read and things you've learned and things that you felt. And it's right, who's to tell you it's right or wrong? But how you act on that is going to dictate the path that you walk in life now.
Yeah.
And the outcomes that you have. And then how you feel about those outcomes is going to dictate the experience you have.
Certainly.
And, you know, there's no right or wrong to it. But what we do with, you know, knowledge that we have, the knowledge that is shared with us, and even just, frankly, what we come across. Right? Because there's also things that are shoved in our face. And then there's things that we seek.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that might be a good place to sort of wrap up the conversation in terms of, like, that premise of what do we do with, said wisdom or knowledge. For me, right, wisdom is always something that is presented in ways that perhaps seem coincidental, that feel like something that creates some sort of like emotional rise in one way or another, right? And again, those are the types of things that we must ask ourselves. We felt something, whether it's, to us, we've interpreted it as positive or negative, we've felt something. Now, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to interpret that this means for us as an individual? No matter whether it seems rational or logical or not, right? It's telling you something about who you are. So that's pretty important in my mind, right? I would say that's a fucking important thing. If something gives you some sort of emotional rise, it means something to you. It's about you. It's telling you about who you are as an innate human being. So perhaps we should honor that,
Yeah, man. I think it's a nice place to leave it.
So yeah, I mean, there's so much more that we can go down, but we'll wrap it there for now. But yeah, I'm guessing there's going to be much more that flows out of this one. But yeah, Shauna, how about you tell everyone where they can find you, man?
Yep. Easiest place to find me is on Instagram, Shaun_Coop. So it's SHAUN_COOP. And how about you, Les?
Yeah, just find me on my website, findingspace.co. Send me a message or an email through there, or you can find me and follow me on my social pages, Facebook and Instagram. The handle is @findingspace.co. You can also send Shaun and I an email through our email address, the hustleandflowpodcast@gmail.com. Any questions you have, maybe you agree or disagree with anything that we've said today, or you have suggestions on future topics or guests, just shoot us an email and say good day.
And as always, guys, a humble request, a little fee that we request. If you got something out of this conversation today, please do share it with one other person, perhaps a colleague, a family member, a friend that you feel might enjoy this conversation too, or be able to draw something out of it, a little nugget that will help them and provoke some thought that can help them to, move through life a bit differently. That's why we have these conversations and record them for you guys and put them out, is so that we can provoke some thoughts in you guys. And when we think different, we can act different and we can do better. So with that, thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.
See you guys.